On this historic day, March 4th, 2025, global financial markets experienced an unprecedented shock after President Trump declared a new trade war. What started as an ordinary morning on Wall Street turned into a financial nightmare that will go down in the history books. Imagine, with a stroke of a pen in the Oval Office, a chain reaction was set in motion that literally evaporated in seconds. This pillar of the American economy collapsed by 2% almost instantly, destroying $34 trillion of market value. But that was only the beginning. The Dow Jones Index, traditionally considered an indicator of the stability of the American economy, suffered a crushing drop of 800 points. Investors, who had recently celebrated the election, in a panic, watched as their portfolios melted away. The pride of America officially fell into the correction zone, having fallen 10% from its December peak. The Volatility Index, VX, known as the Fear Index, soared to its highest values since 2024. Experts are already comparing this day to the largest financial crises in history. Institutional investors, usually keeping cool-headedness in such situations, began to get rid of shares en masse in an attempt to minimize losses. A market correction and a full-scale panic, commented leading analyst Goldman Sachs. Optimism, having fed one of the longest periods of growth in history, evaporated literally overnight. Now, the main question is whether it is possible to stop this decline, or are we witnessing the beginning of a global economic crisis? The consequences of this decision, taken behind closed doors, will be felt for years, and today may become a turning point in world economic history. Follow our updates. The situation continues to evolve, and every hour brings new shocks to the global financial markets. Over the coming months, especially worrying was the fact that the sell-off was not limited to high-risk falls in their shares, as investors questioned the future of U.S.-China relations and their impact on U.S. tech companies. Alphabet, Google's parent company, struggled to stabilize amid concerns about tighter regulations and international trade tensions. Amazon, once the epitome of trade and tech innovation, found itself vulnerable as a trade war threatened to disrupt its vast supply chain and customers. Tesla has already faced one of its most dramatic falls, having lost a staggering 45% of its value from its late 2024 high. Wall Street, once confident in the stability of Trump's economic policies, placed its bets. It was believed the president would never jeopardize the economy in time. However, by the end of the trading day, those bets backfired, with economists and even members of the Trump administration warning that such a radical move could have far-reaching consequences. Despite those warnings, Trump pressed ahead with his plan. On March 4th, 2025, he signed one of the most aggressive tariff policies in modern history. The numbers were 25% on all Mexican imports, another 25% on Canadian goods, and a new 10% levy on Canadian energy exports. The existing 10% tariff on Chinese goods was doubled. The world's largest economies, the U.S. and China, faced escalating trade tensions. The seemingly simple tariff numbers concealed something far more alarming. The consequences have affected more than just governments. A precedent-setting trade war is unfolding around the world. After President Trump imposed massive tariffs on imports, the consequences of that decision have been catastrophic for decades-old business relationships and supply chains. American manufacturers, faced with a sharp rise in the cost of raw materials, small businesses were hit by rising prices for imported goods, and ordinary Americans are already feeling the consequences in their wallets. Trump justified his actions by the fight against drug trafficking from Mexico and Canada, calling it a matter of national security. However, many experts see this as the beginning of an economic war. Under the guise of patriotic rhetoric, Canada was the first to respond to American tariffs. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau immediately announced the introduction of a 5% tariff on goods worth a total of $100 billion. The first wave of tariffs for $30 billion came into force immediately, with the remaining $125 billion planned to be introduced in 21 days. Canada has dealt a pinpoint blow to the most vulnerable sectors of the American economy. A 5% tariff has been introduced on the export of electricity, on which 1.5 million homes in Minnesota, Michigan, and New York depend. Moreover, Ottawa has threatened to completely stop electricity supplies. Canada, as one of the largest nickel producers, has announced the end of its supplies to the United States, which will seriously affect the production of military equipment and batteries. Trudeau responded harshly to Trump's hints about the possibility of Canada joining the United States as the 51st state, stressing that this is a matter of national sovereignty. Leaders of Canadian provinces, from Ontario to Nova Scotia, have expressed readiness for a further escalation of measures. An equally harsh response is expected from Mexico, according to the Ministry of Economy. Preparations are underway for the American agricultural and auto sectors, being the largest buyer of American corn, soybeans, and pork. Mexico plans to introduce serious restrictions on these key export items. American farmers in the Midwest have found themselves at the center of the economic storm, but the real nightmare has unfolded in the auto industry. Mexico's production facilities are deeply integrated into the supply chains of major American automakers, including Ford, GM, and Tesla. Raising tariffs on American components or restricting supplies from Mexico would put the auto giants in the United States in an extremely difficult position. China, which has endured years of trade tensions with the United States, was preparing for an escalation of the conflict after Trump doubled tariffs on Chinese goods to 20%. Beijing was planning retaliatory measures aimed at the most vulnerable parts of the American economy, tech and manufacturing. Chinese officials hinted at expanding tariffs on U.S. semiconductors, which would cut off a vital market for companies like Intel and Hell. But the real threat was China's control of rare earth metals. With more than 80% of the world's supply, China could threaten the entire U.S. tech and military industry, from smartphones to fighter jets. The message from Mexico and China was clear. This wasn't just a trade dispute. It was an economic one, a battleground where the U.S. found itself on the losing end. Markets had collapsed, trade alliances were fraying, and the big question was how far Trump was willing to go. The first day of the trade war had already wiped out trillions of dollars in market value, damaged relationships with close allies, and left industry bracing for the unknown. Major corporations were warning shareholders of declining profits and rising costs. GM and Ford were bracing for billions in losses, and home builders were facing a sharp rise in Canadian lumber. The U.S., once the center of global trade, was isolated. Canada was strengthening economic ties with Europe and Asia. Mexico was looking for alternatives to replace American goods in South America, and China has been strengthening its Belt and Road Initiative by developing relations with countries in Africa and the Middle East. In recent days, interesting information has been coming out of the White House. President Trump may be ready to soften his position on Canada and Mexico, but a natural question arises. Is this a genuine desire for de-escalation, or another attempt to calm worried investors? One thing is for sure. Trump has set in motion a process that has forever changed the economic landscape of the United States. The once undisputed leader of world trade is now rapidly moving towards the very same. Allies are no longer just considering alternatives. They are taking action. De-dollarization, which once seemed like a distant theory, has become a survival strategy for many countries. They are accelerating the move away from the U.S. dollar. They are forming new trade alliances and severing economic ties with the United States. What began as a cautious rebalancing of the system has turned into an urgent need. The question now is not whether the world will move away from American hegemony, but how quickly it will happen. Will Trump be able to stop the chaos before it is too late? I would like to know your opinion on this situation. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more similar materials, subscribe to our channel and click on the bell to not miss updates. We strive to cover topics that others are silent about: politics, economics, and the changing balance of power in the world. This is especially relevant when the situation in the northern Black Sea region continues to influence global processes.